I still remember the exact sound of that knock on my door. Not a friendly knock, a hard, official knock that made my hands shake before I even understood why. For 29 years, my husband and I had done everything right in this country. We came here with almost nothing, worked jobs that broke our backs, saved every single dollar, and raised a son we believed understood the value of honesty better than anyone. When I opened that door and saw 2 police officers standing there, my first thought was that something terrible had happened to him. I never imagined that the terrible thing was something he had done. What I learned that morning would force me to question everything I thought I knew about my own child, about the silence he had been carrying for months right under my roof, and about what it truly means to love someone enough to let them face the consequences of their own choices. This is the story of the hardest year of my life, and the lesson it taught me about family, pride, and the dangerous power of staying silent when you are struggling. Stay with me until the end, because what my son finally confessed to us changed our family forever. My name is Desi, and I am 66 years old. For 29 years I have lived in the United States, but there is not a single day when I forget where I came from. I close my eyes and I still smell the spices from our small shop in Ahmedabad, in the state of Gujarat. That smell was my whole childhood, and later it became my whole marriage. I want to tell you my story, not because it is easy to tell, but because I believe someone out there needs to hear it. This is a story about family, about sacrifice, and about a pain I never expected to feel after everything my husband and I built together. But before I tell you about the darkest morning of my life, I need you to understand where we came from and why we worked so hard to get here. My husband's name is Vikram. We were married when I was 21 years old. His family had a small shop selling household goods, pots, pans, plates, small tools for the kitchen. It was not a big business. We were not rich people, but in our neighborhood, everyone knew us, everyone trusted us, and we lived with our heads held high, even if our pockets were not always full. For many years, that shop was our whole world. Vikram would open it early in the morning, and I would help in the afternoons after finishing the housework. We lived simply. We ate simply. But we were happy, because we believed that if you worked with honesty, life would eventually reward you. In 1987, our son was born. We named him Rohan. I remember holding him for the first time and feeling something change inside me forever. I looked at his small face and I made a promise quietly, in my heart, that I would do everything in my power to give him a better life than the one I had known. I did not know yet what that promise would cost us, or how far we would have to travel to keep it. By the end of the 1990s, business in Ahmedabad had become very difficult. Big stores were opening everywhere, and small family shops like ours could not compete with their prices. Vikram and I spent many nights sitting on the floor of our small house, talking quietly so Rohan would not hear us worrying. We had heard stories from relatives who had gone to America, stories of hard work, yes, but also stories of opportunity, of a country where, if you worked long enough, you could build something for your children that would last. It was not an easy decision. Leaving Ahmedabad meant leaving my mother, my sisters, the streets I had walked my whole life, the temple where I prayed every week. But when I looked at Rohan, who was still a young boy at the time, I understood that this was not really a decision about us. It was a decision about him. We sold the shop. We sold almost everything we owned. And with very little money and even less certainty, we came to the United States. I will not pretend those first years were anything but hard. Vikram, who had been a shop owner, a man respected in our community, found himself working in a warehouse, lifting boxes for hours every day. I worked at a small grocery store owned by another Indian family, stocking shelves and cleaning floors. We lived in a small apartment with another family from Gujarat, sharing the rent because we could not afford a place of our own. I remember crying quietly in the bathroom some nights, so Rohan would not see me, not because I regretted coming here, but because the work was so hard, and I missed home so much, and I was afraid we had made a terrible mistake. But every morning, I woke up, and I looked at my son sleeping, and I found the strength to go to work again. Slowly, things began to change. Vikram learned English better. He found a better job managing inventory at a larger store. I began doing small tailoring jobs for people in our community, sewing clothes in the evenings after my shop work was done. We saved every dollar we could. We did not go to restaurants. We did not buy new things unless we absolutely needed them. Every single dollar had a purpose, and that purpose was always the same: our son's future, and someday, a stable life for our family. The immigration process itself took many, many years. There were lawyers, there were forms, there were long waits where we did not know if we would be allowed to stay. I remember the fear of not knowing, the uncertainty that lived with us every single day for years. But eventually, after so much patience and so much paperwork, we became legal permanent residents. Later, we became citizens. I still remember the day we took our citizenship oath. Vikram held my hand so tightly. We cried, both of us, right there in that government building, surrounded by people from all over the world who understood exactly what that moment meant. Rohan grew up almost entirely in America. He went to public school here. He made friends who were American, Mexican, Chinese, children from everywhere. He spoke English without any accent, better than his own father and mother. In some ways, I think he grew up more American than Indian, and for a long time, I was proud of that. I thought it meant he would have an easier life than we did. I thought it meant he would fit in, that he would never feel like an outsider the way we sometimes did. We worked hard to give him things we never had. Vikram and I eventually saved enough to open a small business of our own again, a convenience store, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Rohan would come after school sometimes and do his homework behind the counter while we worked. I remember those afternoons as some of the happiest of my life. The store was small, but it was proof that everything we had sacrificed had not been for nothing. As Rohan grew older, he went to college, something neither Vikram nor I had been able to do. We were so proud, prouder than words can explain. We told everyone in our community. We told our family back in India. My mother, before she passed away, used to ask me on the phone, "Is Rohan still doing well in his studies?" And I would say yes, he is doing very well. And I could hear the pride in her voice from thousands of miles away. After college, Rohan got a job. He moved into his own apartment, not too far from us, close enough that he would still come for dinner most Sundays. He would sit at our table, eat the food I cooked, the same recipes my mother taught me in Ahmedabad, and I would look at him and think, we did it. We came to this country with almost nothing, and we built a life where our son could sit here, healthy, educated, with opportunities we never had. I want you to understand this. Before I tell you what happened next, I am not telling you this story because I think we did everything perfectly. No parent does everything perfectly. But I'm telling you this so you understand that Rohan did not grow up in poverty, or in neglect, or without love. He grew up watching his parents wake up before sunrise and go to sleep after midnight. He grew up watching us save every penny, not for ourselves, but for him. He grew up in a home where honesty was not just a word we said, it was something we lived every single day, even when it was difficult, even when it would have been easier to cut corners. That is why, on the morning the police came to my door, I could not understand what was happening. My mind simply refused to accept it. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding a cup of chai that was still warm in my hands, when I heard the knock. A hard, official knock, not like a neighbor, not like a friend. My heart began to beat faster before I even reached the door, as if some part of me already knew that after 29 years of building this life, everything was about to be tested in a way I never could have imagined. I opened the door, and my whole world tilted sideways. The two police officers standing at my door were polite, but their faces were serious in a way that made my stomach turn. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes, asked if he could speak with me for a moment. I remember my hands shaking so badly that the chai spilled a little onto my wrist, but I did not even feel the heat. All I could feel was fear, cold and heavy, spreading through my chest. "Ma'am, does Rohan Desai live here, or is this his registered address?" the officer asked. I told him no, my son had his own apartment, but I was his mother. The officer nodded, and then he said words that I will never forget as long as I live. He told me that my son was being investigated in connection with a series of thefts from retail stores in our area. He said Rohan was currently being questioned, but not yet arrested, and that they wanted to know if I had any information about his whereabouts the previous evening. I stood there in my doorway, in my own home, and I felt as if the ground beneath me had turned to water. I did not understand. I could not understand. My son, my Rohan, the boy who did his homework behind our store counter, the boy who graduated college, the boy who worked at what I believed was a respectable job in an office, being questioned about stealing. I told the officers there must be some mistake. There must be another man with the same name. But even as I said the words, some small, terrible part of me remembered things I had been trying not to think about for months. Rohan showing up to Sunday dinner with a new watch he could not really explain, new shoes, a new phone, when just weeks earlier he had complained to me about not having enough money for rent. I had noticed these things, but I had pushed them away, the way a mother pushes away anything that frightens her too much to face directly. After the officers left, I called Vikram at the store, my voice breaking so badly he could barely understand me at first. He closed the store early, something he had done maybe 3 times in 20 years, and rushed home. When he arrived, I was sitting on the kitchen floor, unable to stand, the cup of chai long forgotten and cold beside me. We spent that entire day trying to reach Rohan. His phone went straight to voicemail, again and again. Every unanswered call felt like another stone placed on my chest, until I could barely breathe. Around evening, Rohan finally called us back. His voice sounded strange, tired, distant, like he was speaking from somewhere very far away, even though he was only a few miles from our house. He told us he was fine, that it was a misunderstanding, that he would explain everything soon, but not on the phone. Vikram, who rarely raised his voice, nearly shouted into the phone, demanding that Rohan come to our house immediately. There was a long silence. And then, Rohan said the words that broke something inside me forever. "I can't tonight, Mom. I need some time." He did not come that night, or the next. For 3 days, we lived in a kind of nightmare I cannot fully describe, even now. Vikram barely spoke. He would sit in his chair in the living room, staring at nothing, his hands folded the way he used to fold them when he prayed at the temple, except now his lips were silent. I could see him replaying our entire life in his mind, searching for the moment we went wrong, the way I was doing myself, over and over, without finding any answer. I thought about the neighborhood we came from, about how in Ahmedabad, news like this would travel through the community faster than fire through dry grass. I thought about our friends here, other Indian families we had known for over 20 years, families who had watched Rohan grow up, who had come to his graduation party, who had asked us for advice about raising their own children because they admired how well ours had turned out. What would I tell them? What would I say when they asked how Rohan was doing? But underneath the fear of judgment, underneath the shame that sat in my stomach like a stone, there was something even heavier, the fear for my son's actual future. I had heard stories, terrible stories, about young men with criminal records who could never find good jobs again, who lost everything because of choices made in a moment of weakness or desperation. I thought about immigration consequences too. Even though Rohan was a citizen by now, my mind still spun through every terrible possibility, because that is what 29 years of living with uncertainty does to a mother's heart. It never fully lets you rest. On the 4th day, Rohan finally came to the house. When I opened the door and saw him, I almost did not recognize my own son. He looked thinner. His eyes were red, with dark circles beneath them, like he had not slept in days. He stood in the doorway, not moving, as if he expected us to slam the door in his face. I did not slam the door. I pulled him inside and held him the way I had held him when he was small enough to carry, even though he was now a grown man, taller than me by nearly a foot. He began to cry, deep, broken sobs that shook his whole body, and for a moment I forgot my anger, my fear, my shame. I only felt the pain of my child's suffering, and every instinct in me wanted to protect him from it, the way I had protected him his whole life. But Vikram did not move from his chair. He simply looked at Rohan, his face unreadable, and said only one sentence: "Sit down and tell us everything. All of it. No more hiding." And so Rohan told us. He had lost his job almost 8 months earlier. He had not told us. Every Sunday, when he came for dinner and told us stories about his office, about his co-workers, about a promotion he was supposedly working toward, it had all been lies. He had been unemployed for months, quietly drowning in bills he could not pay, too ashamed to tell his own parents the truth. He explained that at first it started small. He had gone into a large store to buy something he genuinely needed, and on impulse, he had also taken something small without paying, something he told himself did not matter, something the store would never even notice. Nothing happened. No alarm, no confrontation, nothing. And that nothing, he said, was the most dangerous thing of all, because after that first time, when nothing happened, the fear disappeared a little, and the next time he was struggling to pay for groceries, he did it again, then again. He told us, with his head down, unable to look either of us in the eyes, that it became a strange kind of relief, a way to survive without asking us for money, without admitting failure, without shattering the image he thought we had of him. I listened to my son confess to being a thief, and I felt something inside me break in a way I did not know a heart could break. Not because I did not love him. I loved him more in that moment than I think I had ever loved anyone in my life, but because I understood, with total clarity, that the boy we raised to value honesty above almost everything else had been living a double life for nearly a year, and we had not seen it. We who thought we knew every corner of our son's heart had missed something so important, so dangerous, hiding right beneath the surface of our Sunday dinners. Vikram finally spoke again, his voice quiet but shaking with an emotion I had rarely heard from him. "Why did you not come to us? We would have helped you. We would have found a way." Rohan looked up, his eyes full of tears, and said something that has stayed with me every day since. "Because I was afraid of disappointing you. I was afraid you would look at me and see failure, after everything you both sacrificed to bring me here." In trying so hard to protect us from his failure, my son had instead created something far worse. And now, all three of us sat in that living room, not knowing what would happen next, not knowing what the law would decide, not knowing if the family we had built across 2 continents and nearly 30 years could survive what was still to come. That night, none of us slept. Rohan stayed at the house, sleeping in his childhood bedroom for the first time in over 10 years, and I lay awake listening for any sound from his room, the way I used to when he was a small boy with fevers, except now the fever was not in his body. It was somewhere deeper, somewhere I could not reach with medicine or with prayers, though I said many prayers that night. In the morning, we sat together at the kitchen table, the same table where Rohan had eaten 1,000 Sunday dinners, pretending everything in his life was fine. Vikram, who had barely spoken the night before, now spoke with a calm seriousness I had rarely seen in him. "We need to understand exactly what is happening legally," he said. "Not tomorrow, today." We contacted a lawyer that same morning, a man named Mr. Bradley, who had helped another family in our community years earlier with a business matter. He listened carefully as Rohan explained everything, the thefts, the amounts, the stores involved, the months of unemployment he had hidden from everyone. Mr. Bradley's face remained calm and professional, though I could see him taking careful notes, occasionally asking sharp, precise questions that made Rohan's voice shake even more. Mr. Bradley explained that because the thefts had happened multiple times across several different stores over several months, the charges could potentially be serious. He used words like grand theft, depending on the total value, and pattern of behavior, which he said prosecutors sometimes viewed more harshly than a single isolated incident. My stomach turned as I listened. I had imagined many terrible things over the past 4 days, but hearing an actual lawyer speak about actual charges, actual court dates, actual possible consequences, made everything feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. He also told us something that gave me a small, fragile piece of hope. Because Rohan had no previous criminal record, because he was cooperating fully, and because this appeared to be tied to a genuine period of financial desperation rather than habitual criminal behavior, there might be options, programs for first-time offenders, possibilities of restitution, meaning paying back the stores for what was taken, combined with community service, that could avoid the harshest outcomes. But nothing was guaranteed. Nothing would be decided quickly, and Rohan would have to fully cooperate with the ongoing investigation, which included admitting to incidents the police did not yet know about. That last part frightened Rohan the most. "If I admit to things they don't already know," he asked quietly, "doesn't that make it worse for me?" Mr. Bradley looked at him steadily. It might increase the total charges on paper, but judges and prosecutors respond very differently to a person who comes forward honestly versus a person who is caught lying or hiding things later. Honesty now is not just the right thing to do. It is also, strategically, your best option. I watched my son's face as he absorbed this. For nearly a year, hiding the truth had felt like his only way to survive, his only way to protect the people he loved from disappointment. Now, the very thing that could save him was the opposite of everything he had been doing: complete, uncomfortable honesty. Over the following days, life became a strange combination of practical tasks and deep emotional wounds that had not even begun to heal. There were meetings with the lawyer, there were calls from detectives, there was a list, growing longer each day, of every store, every date, every item Rohan had taken, which he had to write down and review with Mr. Bradley before it was submitted. I remember sitting beside Rohan one evening as he made that list, watching his hand shake as he wrote down each incident. A bottle of medicine from a pharmacy, taken during a month he could not afford his prescription and was too proud to ask us for help. Small electronics, which he later admitted he had sold for cash to pay rent. Grocery items, again and again. Small things, cereal, meat, items that broke my heart more than anything else, because they told me my son had sometimes simply been hungry and had never once told his own mother. "Why didn't you tell me you were hungry?" I asked him that night, my voice barely a whisper. "I would have brought you food every single day. I would have never asked you a single question." He put down the pen and looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that seemed far older than his 39 years. "Mom, you and Dad gave up everything for me. You worked yourselves into the ground so I could have opportunities you never had. How could I come to you and say I lost my job, I'm broke, I need you to feed me like I'm a child again?" It felt like it would erase everything you sacrificed, like I would be proving that none of it was worth it. I understood in that moment something painful about the way we had raised him, something I had never considered before. We had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and told him so many stories about our own struggles that somewhere along the way, he had absorbed a lesson we never meant to teach him, that failure was unacceptable, that struggling meant disappointing us, that our love was somehow tied to his success. We had wanted to inspire him with our story. Instead, without realizing it, we had also placed a weight on his shoulders that he felt he could not put down, even when he desperately needed help. This realization did not excuse what he had done. I want to be very clear about that, because I know some people listening to this story might expect me to make excuses for my son's choices. I do not. Stealing is wrong, no matter the reason behind it, no matter how difficult the circumstances. Rohan understood this himself, deeply, and he never once tried to argue otherwise. But understanding why something happened, understanding the fear and shame that led him there, helped me hold both truths at the same time, that my son had done something wrong and that my son was still someone worth fighting for. The investigation continued for several weeks. During that time, Rohan moved back into our house temporarily, both because he could no longer afford his apartment without a job, and because, honestly, none of us wanted to be apart during such an uncertain time. Vikram, who had said very little in the early days, began speaking with Rohan every evening after dinner, long conversations I was not always part of. Sometimes I would hear their voices through the walls, sometimes raised, sometimes quiet, sometimes silent for long stretches that felt heavier than any words. One evening, I asked Vikram what they spoke about during those long conversations. He was quiet for a moment before answering. "I am telling him about the shop in Ahmedabad," he said, "about the years when business was so bad we could not pay our own electricity bill, about the fear I felt back then. I never told him these things before because I did not want him to worry as a child, but now I think my silence about my own struggles taught him to be silent about his. I began to understand that healing this wound in our family was not only about Rohan's criminal case, it was about something older, something that had been passed down without any of us realizing it, a kind of pride that made it difficult for the men in our family, in particular, to admit weakness, to ask for help, to say the words, "I am struggling," out loud. Rohan also began looking for work again during this time, though it was incredibly difficult. He had to disclose the ongoing investigation to potential employers, and several opportunities disappeared the moment he mentioned it. I watched him grow more discouraged with each rejection, and I worried quietly that this discouragement might push him back toward the same desperate thinking that had caused this crisis in the first place. So I made sure, every single day, that he knew he was not alone. I cooked his favorite meals. I sat with him in the evenings, even when neither of us spoke much. I told him, again and again, that whatever happened with the legal case, he was still my son, and that would never change. But I also told him something else, something Vikram and I had decided together after much discussion. We told him that no matter how this ended, he would need to take full responsibility in the courtroom and in his life. We would support him emotionally. We would help him find honest work. We would stand beside him at every hearing. But we would not pay restitution money on his behalf, and we would not try to use any influence, any lawyer's tricks, any excuse to make his consequences disappear. He needed to face what he had done fully as a man, not as our little boy who needed rescuing one more time. It was one of the hardest decisions I have ever made as a mother. Every instinct in me wanted to fix everything, to make the pain disappear, to protect him the way I had protected him his entire life. But somewhere during those difficult weeks, I finally understood something that took me 66 years to learn. Sometimes loving your child means allowing them to carry the full weight of their own choices, trusting that they are strong enough to carry it and strong enough to become someone better because of it. The court date was set for 6 weeks later, and none of us knew, not really, what was going to happen when that day finally arrived. The 6 weeks before the court date felt longer than almost any period of my life, longer even than the early years after we first arrived in America, with nothing but 2 suitcases and a young son who did not yet understand why his parents cried so often at night. During those weeks, Rohan did something I had not expected. He began volunteering at a local food bank, not because the court required it yet, but because he said he needed to do something, anything, that made him feel less like the person he had become and more like the person he wanted to be again. I remember the first time he came home from a shift there, his shirt slightly dirty from unloading boxes of canned food, and told me about a mother he had met, someone struggling to feed her 3 children, someone who reminded him painfully of his own hunger during the months he had hidden from us. I used to think stealing was about the things themselves, he told me quietly that evening. The watch, the shoes, whatever. But it was never really about the things. It was about feeling out of control, feeling like I was failing, and taking something, anything, made me feel like I had power over something in my life again, even for a moment. Handing food to people today, that gave me a different kind of power, a better kind. I did not know, in that moment, whether this was the beginning of real change or simply words spoken in fear before a difficult court appearance. I had learned enough by then to be cautious with hope, but I let myself believe, just a little, that something inside my son was shifting. Mr. Bradley worked diligently during those weeks, gathering letters of support, documentation of Rohan's job search efforts, records of his volunteer work, and a full accounting of every item taken, along with a plan for how Rohan intended to repay each store in full. Vikram and I wrote a letter as well, describing our family's history, our own struggles, and our belief as parents that our son had made a serious mistake but was not defined by it. I rewrote that letter perhaps a dozen times, terrified of saying too much or too little, terrified that my words might somehow hurt more than they helped. The morning of the court date, I woke up before the sun rose, the same way I used to wake up decades earlier to open our small shop in Ahmedabad. I made tea for all 3 of us, and we sat together in the kitchen in near silence, none of us very hungry, all of us dressed more formally than we had been in years. Rohan wore a plain gray suit that Vikram had bought him years ago for a job interview. He looked in that moment both like a grown man and like my small boy at the same time, and I had to look away for a moment to keep myself from crying before we had even left the house. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, quieter too, without the drama I had seen in movies over the years. The judge, an older woman with sharp, observant eyes, reviewed the case carefully. The prosecutor spoke about the seriousness of the pattern, the multiple stores affected, the importance of accountability. My heart pounded through every word, and I found myself squeezing Vikram's hand so tightly my fingers ached. Then Mr. Bradley spoke on Rohan's behalf, describing the circumstances, the job loss, the shame that had kept him from asking for help, the full cooperation he had given investigators, including incidents they might never have discovered on their own. He spoke about the volunteer work, the job search, the letters from our family, and from 2 former co-workers who still believed in Rohan's character despite everything. And then, unexpectedly, the judge asked Rohan directly if he wished to speak. I watched my son stand, his hands trembling slightly at his sides, and speak words that were not written down anywhere, words that came only from his own heart. He apologized, not in vague or rehearsed terms, but specifically to the stores he had harmed, to the community he had embarrassed, and finally, turning slightly toward us in the courtroom, to his parents, for the shame he had made us carry, and for the silence that had allowed everything to grow so much worse than it needed to be. I was taught by my parents that honesty matters more than almost anything, he said, his voice breaking. And I forgot that lesson when I needed it most. I am asking for the chance to prove that I have not forgotten it anymore. The judge listened carefully to everything, and after what felt like an eternity of silence, while she reviewed the documents in front of her, she spoke. Because it was Rohan's first offense, because of his full cooperation, because of the restitution plan already being put into place, and because of what she called genuine evidence of accountability rather than mere words, she offered him a path that avoided prison entirely. He would be required to complete a lengthy period of probation, pay full restitution to every store affected, complete a set number of community service hours beyond what he had already begun, and attend financial counseling classes designed to help him build healthier habits around money and, she added pointedly, healthier habits around asking for help when he needed it. It was not a small punishment. The restitution amount was significant, especially for a man who had just lost his job. The community service hours would take months to complete. The probation period would follow him for a long time, a formal record of this chapter of his life that would not simply disappear, but it was not prison. And more than that, it was, in its own way, a second chance, a structured path toward rebuilding what had been broken, both with the law and, more importantly to me, within himself. When we walked out of that courthouse together, none of us spoke for a long time. We simply walked, the 3 of us, side by side, into the sunlight of an ordinary afternoon that somehow felt entirely different from any afternoon before it. Finally, standing beside the car, Rohan turned to us and said, "I know I don't deserve everything you both have done for me. I know sorry isn't enough, but I promise you, I am going to spend the rest of my life earning back your trust." Vikram, who rarely showed strong emotion in public, pulled our son into his arms and held him for a long moment. "You do not need to earn our love," he said quietly. That was never in question. But yes, trust, that is something different. Trust is built slowly, one honest day at a time. We will walk that road with you, but you must walk it yourself. The months that followed were not easy. Rohan eventually found a new job, a smaller position than he had before, at a company willing to give him a chance despite his record, largely because of his own honesty during the interview process, choosing to disclose everything up front rather than hide it and risk it surfacing later. He began repaying the stores, slowly, a portion of nearly every paycheck going toward restitution for well over a year. He continued his volunteer work at the food bank long after the court no longer required it, saying it had become the one part of this entire ordeal that made him feel genuinely proud of himself again. Slowly, painfully, trust began to rebuild between us, not in dramatic moments, but in small, quiet ones. Rohan calling simply to tell us about his day, without hiding anything. Rohan admitting, one evening, that he was struggling financially again during a slow month, and asking, for the first time in his adult life, if we could help him figure out a budget together, rather than hiding the struggle in silence. That single moment, small as it seemed, meant more to me than almost anything else in this entire story, because it told me that the lesson had finally reached the deepest part of him, the part that had been too afraid to ask for help before. It has been almost 3 years now, since that morning the police knocked on my door. Rohan is doing well. He has rebuilt his career slowly, carefully. He still comes for Sunday dinner, And now, when he talks about his week, I know I am hearing the truth, all of it, the good parts and the difficult parts, because we have learned, as a family, that hiding struggle does not protect the people you love. It only isolates you from the very people who would do anything to help carry your burden, if only you let them. I think often about the promise I made when I first held my son as a newborn baby in Ahmedabad, the promise to give him a better life than the one I had known. For many years, I thought that promise meant giving him money, education, opportunity, comfort. I understand now that it also meant something harder to give, the space to fail, the strength to hold him accountable, even when it broke my heart to do so, and the patience to walk beside him as he rebuilt himself into someone stronger than he was before. We came to this country with almost nothing, believing that hard work and honesty could build a life worth living. I still believe that, perhaps even more deeply than I did before all of this happened, because in the end, it was not the absence of struggle that defined our family. It was what we chose to do when that struggle finally came out into the light.